thousands of years, towering pyramids have stood as silent testaments to a civilization that once thrived along the Nile. Children point in awe, tourists jape at the scale, and textbooks offer chapters on pharaohs, papyrus, and pyramids built by nameless laborers. But there's a powerful story that has been omitted, one that speaks of black rulers whose names and achievements were deliberately erased from the very stones they commissioned. This is the story of the Lost Black Pharaohs, why history erased them from the pyramids. Listen now and rediscover a heritage rewritten, a resilience restored, and a legacy reclaimed. Imagine a world centuries before the pharaohs of popular legend, when Nubia and Kush rose along the Nile, thriving with wealth, culture, and leadership. They built their own pyramids and temples, developed advanced ironworking and trade networks, and held sway over the land both north and south. Their art and elegance predated, paralleled, and later reclaimed control over Egypt itself. Yet, with the rise of foreign dynasties and the rewriting of history, these black rulers were relegated to footnotes. Anonymous artisans, mythical figures, or worse, erased entirely. Their sarcophagi were stripped of titles, their monuments defaced, and their names chiseled away. Archaeologists once assumed Egypt's greatness required whiteness, and so they looked past the Nile's southern dynasties, their skin tones, their stories. Their contributions were dismissed as derivative or borrowed, rather than born of brilliance unique to them. Why did this erasure happen? Because power always seeks to craft its own narrative. When conquerors took power in Egypt, whether Greek, Roman, Persian, or Assyrian, they found it convenient to downplay the rule of Kushite monarchs who had restored order and prosperity. When Western explorers arrived in the 19th century, they brought racial assumptions baked into empire. Their scientific methods were tinged with bias, their reconstructions colored by prejudice. They struggled to see a black civilization as equals, let alone superior. It was easier for them to claim that the pyramids belonged to one lineage, Greek, Near Eastern, or European, than to recognize that black pharaohs had stood on the same ground, headphones drowning in sand, building, ruling, and inspiring. Yet the evidence remains, if we learn to read it. In the sands of Sudan lie the pyramids of Meroë, the tombs of kings and queens who ruled with authority and statecraft. Their script, Meroitic, remains partially undeciphered, but studies of their burial goods, artwork, and inscriptions make their agency clear. They built roads, they minted coins, they negotiated treaties, they led armies. During their reign, the world heard the voice of black rulership echoing beyond the Nile as artisans, as architects, and as advocates for their people. These were not anomalies, they were not borrowed grandeur. They were sovereigns forging their own chapters in human history. Their erasure is not a mystery, it is a choice. When hieroglyphs were defaced or overwritten, when statues were recarved, when conquerors squeezed the Kushite past into the margins, they said to the world, your history does not include this. And generations accepted that erasure. In classrooms, in museums, in documentaries, the gloss omitted their names. Piye, Taharqa Amanirenas, rulers who beat back Assyrians, led armies, constructed temples, and governed entire nations. Their achievements were thousands of years ahead of European discoveries and revolution. But because those telling the story did not see rulers of color as legitimate, the stones began to forget they ever spoke. What does this loss mean for us today? It means that whole populations were taught to doubt their heritage. It means that millions looked at the pyramids and said, this was not ours. It means that the image of greatness became disconnected from blackness. It means that when black children learned about ancient societies, the echoes of their ancestors were silenced and replaced by foreign voices. That disconnection fuels insecurity, injustice, and a sense of exclusion from the narrative of human achievement. The schools, the books, the museums, they all whispered, your past does not include greatness. This becomes spiritual hunger, a longing for dignity, for identity, for recognition. But here is the truth. The stones still hold their names. Archaeologists today use technology, ground-penetrating radar, infrared imaging, spectral analysis, to rediscover inscriptions that were erased. They lift traces of paint from statues, detecting skin tones. They analyze DNA from remains, confirming ancestry. They read the lives of the so-called forgotten rulers. And as the evidence comes to light, it restores not just names, but Piye's conquest of Egypt in the 8th century BCE is no longer a footnote. Taharqa's infrastructure projects, the canals, the temples, the palaces, shine as unparalleled achievements. Amanirenas' defiance of Rome becomes legendary. These were empires, not shadows. They moved from given names to living humans, leaders, parents, spouses, creators, innovators. This restoration invites us to reframe identity, not as lacking but as powerful. It forgives the lie that those who look like us cannot build pyramids, command armies, or rule nations. It affirms that complexity, intellect, governance, and artistry are not restricted to one shade. It reconnects us with a lineage that includes legal codes, architectural breakthroughs, cosmological insights, and cross-cultural diplomacy. It gives back the value stolen from generations whose line was portrayed as absent or perpetual underclass. To reclaim this legacy is not merely academic, it is a revolution of the self. When people know they descended from pyramid builders, faith shapers, and world rulers, they stand differently. They refuse limits based on skin. They lead schools, science, arts, business, and diplomacy with conviction. They parent with pride, teach with purpose, innovate without apology. The energy once spent to deny, doubt, or apologize is redirected into creation, innovation, and progress. Communities become grounded in ownership, not reaction. This is not the romantic revival of grandeur. It's a necessary correction that repositions millions into the narrative of capacity and purpose. We must act. Universities must teach the true timeline of Kushite rule. Museums must reinterpret exhibits to honor Black pharaohs as equal. Film and media must tell stories about Taharqa's canals, about Queen Amanirenas in battle, and about Piye's vision. Schools must include their names when teaching Egyptian history. Public spaces must rename monuments, highways, or public schools to their names, not as tokens, but as markers of a rightful place in collective memory. Every time someone hears of Meroë, they should think, this was built by our king. And every time a child of color sees pyramids, they should feel, this belongs to me. We must use this restoration to fuel the future. Let entrepreneurs see it's their birthright to create. Let scholars see their scholarship is part of a lineage that shaped law and engineering. Let artists see that their creative genius is inheriting a narrative that includes visual mastery. Let politicians, activists, and leaders stand on the tableau of courage displayed by those queens and kings who spoke truth to power. This is not fantasy, it is the evidence that can recalibrate the compass of conscience, of education, of culture. So listen to the walls of Meroë. Listen to the lips of ancient Nubian tombs. Listen to the scars left on temples and statues where paint remains behind the strokes of erasure. This is a voice that refused silence. It sings, we were here, we built, we ruled, we taught, and we deserve recognition. We deserve remembrance. We deserve revival. We are the continuation of those first Black pharaohs, the lost architects of empire and civilization. And now we remember. And in remembering, we rise.
Long before the grandeur of classical Greece and Rome, before the cathedrals of Europe or the imperial palaces of Asia, there existed a kingdom in the heart of Africa that commanded respect or wealth and innovation. This was not a side note in history. It was a major chapter. The civilizations of Nubia and Kush, rooted in what is today southern Egypt and northern Sudan, were not mere imitators of Egypt as once falsely assumed. They were innovators in their own right, creating systems of government, building temples and tombs, and commanding armies that could rival any in the ancient world. Their strategic location along the Nile made them not only a cultural crossroads, but also a hub for trade, diplomacy, and scientific advancement. Their rulers were not simply chieftains or local kings. They were pharaohs in every sense, commanders of vast territories, orchestrators of infrastructure, and central figures in religion and statecraft. These African leaders wore the same crowns as their northern counterparts, built pyramids that still stand today, and led political systems marked by order and complexity. They established monarchies that lasted centuries, with dynasties that extended their power deep into Egypt. Their governance included structured administration, judicial systems, taxation, and codified laws. These were not pyramid societies, but highly organized kingdoms with long-term planning, national cohesion, and social stratification. In the realm of architecture, the ingenuity of Nubian and Kushite engineers is still evident. Their pyramids, more numerous in Sudan than in Egypt, stand as a lasting testament to their architectural skill and religious devotion. These structures, though often smaller than the pyramids at Giza, were built with precise mathematics, durable materials, and deep symbolic meaning. Their temples, some of which are carved into cliffs or built along sacred rivers, display detailed inscriptions, elaborate column designs, and sacred chambers aligned with celestial events. Their cities included storage facilities, marketplaces, schools, and ceremonial courts, showing their sophistication in both civil and spiritual life. In military strength, these African kingdoms were anything but fragile. Their warriors were trained, disciplined, and equipped with bronze and iron weaponry long before much of the world entered the Iron Age. They engaged in campaigns that defended their borders, expanded their influence, and at times even took control of Upper and Lower Egypt. When Piye, a king of Kush, marched into Egypt in the 8th century BCE, he did not conquer a crumbling kingdom. He unified it under one rule with a vision that extended across cultures. Later rulers like Taharqa would hold back the mighty Assyrian Empire and build alliances that crossed continents. But despite their immense contributions to world history, the narrative of Nubia and Kush was intentionally diminished or removed. European colonial scholars, beginning in the 18th and 19th centuries, refused to credit black Africans with the ability to rule, create, or lead. They dismissed the achievements of these ancient civilizations as borrowed or accidental. They overlooked the artifacts, misinterpreted the ruins, and suppressed the oral histories. The result was a massive erasure of the true identity and capability of African leadership in the ancient world. Entire populations were taught that greatness did not exist south of Egypt, that innovation had a skin tone, and that African peoples could only be subjects, never sovereigns. Today, that falsehood is being challenged. New research, backed by satellite imagery, carbon dating, and DNA analysis, has begun to restore the truth. The pyramids of Meroë are being studied not just for their aesthetic, but for their complexity and symbolism. Written texts are being translated with more cultural context, allowing us to see not just the administrative details of these kingdoms, but the philosophies that shaped them. Military tactics, agricultural planning, metallurgy, and artistic expression all reflect a people whose intelligence and innovation deserve equal place in history, alongside their more publicized neighbors to the north. When we talk about Nubia and Kush, we are not describing lost tribes or distant footnotes. We are talking about powerful black civilizations that mastered the art of governance, built monumental legacies in stone, and stood firm in the face of conquest. Their legacy is not just African, it is global. To understand history accurately, we must acknowledge that these civilizations were pillars of strength, hubs of culture, and beacons of human potential. Their presence in the ancient world was not an exception, it was a standard. Reclaiming their place in history is not only an academic correction, but a cultural awakening, reminding us that greatness knows no boundaries of geography or color. In the rich and often misunderstood tapestry of ancient history, the story of Africa's powerful rulers stands as one of the most overlooked. Among them were black pharaohs whose leadership shaped an entire era. Figures of vision, discipline, and strength who once stood at the pinnacle of political and cultural authority. Their names, such as Piye, Taharqa, and Amanirenas,
belong not to myth or folklore, but to real history. Leaders whose actions influenced the balance of power across regions and whose accomplishments left a legacy written in stone. Politics and diplomacy. Yet for far too long, their contributions were not simply forgotten, but deliberately erased from the dominant records of civilization's rise. The rule of Piye marked a significant moment, a time when forces from the south unified territories that had once been divided. He brought stability to regions that had fallen into disorder, using strategy and vision to achieve his goals, rather than destruction. His leadership extended beyond war. He believed in order, unity, and the preservation of culture. His inscriptions speak of respect for spiritual tradition and fairness in governance. His rule laid the foundation for a dynasty that would oversee one of the most impressive cross-cultural collaborations of the time. Taharqa, one of the most prominent of these leaders, stood as a giant both literally and historically. He commanded a kingdom that rivaled any in his age. During his rule, architecture flourished, diplomacy expanded, and military strength was maintained. Monuments were built not just in his homeland, but far beyond, marking the reach of his authority. He defended his people against foreign invasion and led with a sense of responsibility that reflected the weight of his crown. His presence in the historical record is confirmed by writings, artifacts, and monuments, yet for decades, his identity as a black leader was diminished or ignored by those who shaped mainstream education and public memory. Amanirenas, a powerful queen, demonstrated the influence and resilience of leadership from this region. She is remembered for her courage and command during times of foreign aggression. When external forces tried to impose control, she resisted not with words, but with organized defense and unbreakable determination. She fought to protect her people's independence, and her actions left an imprint that extended across generations. Her story is one of strength, but for years it was left out of textbooks and historical narratives that favored more familiar names, despite her significant achievements. The question is not whether these rulers existed, the evidence is there. The question is why their stories were so often excluded from the story told to the world. Much of this comes down to who wrote the early versions of history and what they believed to be possible. When explorers, historians, and archaeologists from distant lands arrived, many did not expect to find high culture in regions of Africa. When they did, it challenged their assumptions. Rather than revise their beliefs, they instead reshaped the evidence to fit their worldview. This meant assigning African innovations to outsiders or downplaying them altogether. Monuments were left unstudied, names unspoken, and legacies misunderstood. This suppression was more than academic. It influenced how generations of people thought about Africa and black identity. It caused doubt to spread in places where pride should have grown. Children in classrooms across the world were taught history that left out entire civilizations. The silence created by that exclusion echoed through time, affecting not only understanding but identity itself. Those who descended from greatness were left with fragments of truth and little access to the full picture of what came before them. But history has a way of resurfacing, even when buried deep. As new research methods emerged and perspectives began to shift, scholars began re-examining the records with fresh eyes. What they found confirmed what local traditions and oral histories had preserved for centuries. These black leaders were not marginal. They were central. Their rule was sophisticated, their influence wide-reaching, their ideas advanced. Their cities were organized, their societies complex, and their achievements worthy of recognition. Inscriptions carved into temple walls, pyramids that still pierce the sky, and objects buried with care. All of it points to people who understood the value of legacy. These kings and queens did not merely live, they shaped the direction of nations. Their reach extended through trade, law, and ideas. They were thinkers and warriors, diplomats and builders. Their monuments were not mere symbols, they were declarations of presence, of permanence, of pride. The rediscovery of their stories does more than correct the record. It restores dignity. It gives context to achievements long disconnected from their true origin. It inspires a new generation to look deeper, to question what they've been taught, and to seek truth without prejudice. It reminds us that history is not just a timeline of events, but a reflection of those who decide what is remembered and what is not. And now, as more people seek to know the full picture, these once erased figures are being given the space they always deserved. Not as background, but as defining forces in the ancient world.
During the exploration and documentation of ancient civilizations, a troubling pattern emerged, one that altered how the world would come to understand Africa's contributions to global history. Scholars and excavators, often arriving from nations with their own imperial motives, carried with them assumptions and beliefs shaped by the dominant ideologies of their time. These assumptions were not based on objective study, but on deeply rooted beliefs in racial hierarchies and cultural superiority. As they uncovered ruins, artifacts, and tombs, many of them failed to recognize or outright denied the significance of what they were witnessing when it came from African civilizations. What should have been treated with reverence and honesty became filtered through a distorted lens that favored narratives which supported their own status and worldview. Instead of acknowledging the architectural, scientific, and political advancements of black-led kingdoms, they often attributed major innovations to external influences. They labeled African achievements as imitations, implying that true ingenuity could only come from outside the continent. This framing diminished the original accomplishments of ancient African societies, portraying them as passive recipients of knowledge rather than independent creators of their own civilization. Entire dynasties that once ruled and reshaped territories were reclassified, misidentified, or removed from records altogether. This wasn't simply a lack of understanding, it was a rewriting of identity meant to reinforce colonial control over both the past and the present. As excavations continued, the findings that didn't fit neatly into the accepted views were often left out of reports, misinterpreted in publications, or stored away without public acknowledgement. Statues with features that didn't align with European standards were sometimes defaced or described inaccurately. Monuments that told stories of black rulers were neglected or misdated, and written records were mistranslated to diminish their meaning. These actions weren't random errors. They reflected a widespread refusal to recognize that people of African descent had established sophisticated societies, governed vast regions, and developed systems of religion, economics, and law long before Europe emerged from its own dark ages. This suppression extended far beyond archaeological digs and academic journals. It permeated the educational materials that shaped young minds around the world. History books emphasized European discoveries and achievements while reducing African civilizations to brief mentions or focusing only on colonial periods. Museums displayed African artifacts as exotic or tribal, not as remnants of great nations with enduring legacy. This created a damaging impression that Africa existed outside the bounds of innovation, as if it played no meaningful role in shaping the world's intellectual and cultural evolution. As a result, generations grew up disconnected from the truth of Africa's powerful past. This distorted record did not only affect how the world saw Africa, it also changed how African people viewed themselves. When the stories of leaders, builders, thinkers, and artists were removed, it left behind a silence that could easily be filled with doubt. Without visible examples of black greatness from the ancient world, many were led to believe that greatness had to come from elsewhere. This disconnection weakened confidence, identity, and pride across communities who had once stood at the center of civilization. Rebuilding that connection means more than correcting a textbook. It means repairing a lineage of purpose, excellence, and potential that was deliberately broken. Thankfully, modern tools and shifting mindsets are allowing today's scholars and researchers to uncover the truths that were once buried or ignored. Advances in archaeology, genetics, and historical linguistics are making it possible to reconstruct narratives with greater accuracy and precision. These disciplines are showing what many oral traditions have long held to be true, that African civilizations played a leading role in shaping the ancient world. The architecture of Nubia, the military might of Kush, the wisdom of Meroë, and the governance of their rulers are no longer hidden in shadow. With each discovery, the record becomes clearer, and the voices once silenced are heard again. The journey to restore this history is far from complete. But every step forward matters. Reclaiming and celebrating Africa's ancient legacy challenges outdated narratives and returns rightful dignity to cultures that were always deserving of recognition. It reminds the world that civilization did not emerge from one continent alone, and that the human story is far more interconnected than once believed. Acknowledging this past strengthens not just the descendants of these kingdoms, but enriches our global understanding of what humanity has achieved together. Across centuries, the landscape of ancient Africa has preserved more than soil and stone. It has held the silence of stories that were pushed aside. What once stood as undeniable proof of black leadership, innovation, and strategic brilliance was buried, misrepresented, or simply left out. But history has not vanished. It has waited. And now, through the lens of new research methods, enhanced tools, and open inquiry, the truth is no longer confined to hidden chambers or neglected artifacts. The world is beginning to look again, and what it finds is transforming what we thought we knew. Advanced research techniques are making it possible to read between the lines of ancient records and reassess what lies beneath the surface. Technologies like satellite imaging, 3D scanning, and ground-penetrating radar are revealing buried structures and city layouts that point to complex societies capable of great feats of engineering, planning, and cultural expression. These discoveries are not based on speculation. They are confirmed by measurable data, analyzed by teams who now approach African history with greater accuracy and less bias. What was once dismissed as isolated or underdeveloped is now being properly identified as part of expansive and structured civilizations. Carbon dating and materials analysis are helping researchers understand the age and origin of objects with precision. Walls once thought to be simple fortifications are now recognized as components of administrative centers. Artifacts once labeled as ceremonial are reclassified as tools of scientific measurement or governance. Inscriptions on stone and clay are being retranslated, giving voice to rulers whose influence extended far beyond their borders. These translations offer more than names. They reveal policies, events, and values. They paint pictures of cities that operated with clear social systems, international connections, and long-term development goals. Linguistic research is also reshaping the way experts understand the relationships between African cultures and the ancient world. Patterns in language structure, grammar, and writing styles are showing shared roots between regions once thought unrelated. This points to not only trade and migration, but to educational systems, shared philosophies, and intellectual exchange. What this tells us is that black civilizations were not just maintaining their existence, they were expanding knowledge, contributing ideas, and shaping dialogue between nations. Their influence was not passive but active and far-reaching. The study of art, design, and material culture is revealing high levels of skill and symbolism that were previously undervalued. Intricate jewelry, precisely carved statues, and architectural blueprints demonstrate mastery over form and function. These objects were not random creations but carefully crafted expressions of identity, power, and innovation. They tell stories of leaders who understood aesthetics, mathematics, spirituality, and engineering. They speak to cultures that honored balance, proportion, and alignment, both physical and philosophical. As this information emerges, it doesn't just fill gaps in the past, it challenges the foundation of long-accepted narrative. It shows that the idea of civilization spreading only from north to south or west to east was flawed from the start. It wasn't a one-way path, it was a web of influence that included Africa not as an observer, but as a contributor, a leader, and often a pioneer. This changes how we understand the global story. It reminds us that genius is not owned by any one region or background. Excellence was and is universal. Academic institutions are beginning to update course materials, and museums are revising exhibits to include more accurate content. Documentaries and books are correcting previous assumptions, highlighting voices and stories that were pushed aside. School children who once saw only partial truths in their textbooks are now being introduced to a broader view, one that includes black pharaohs, engineers, architects, and strategists who stood tall in their time. This reshaping of public knowledge is not just academic, it is transformation. It builds pride, it corrects injustice, and it lays the groundwork for more honest conversations across generations. What's being uncovered today is not just about the past, It's a key to the present. As people around the world search for deeper understanding of identity, culture, and contribution, these findings offer a restored connection to legacies that were never truly lost, only hidden. These are the blueprints of achievement. They are reminders that greatness left marks in the desert sand, on temple walls, in trade routes, and in the stories passed down through families. To uncover them now is not to rewrite history, it's to reveal what has always been true.
Restoring the truth about Black pharaohs does more than fill a gap in the historical timeline. It reshapes how we define influence, identity, and potential. When generations grow up disconnected from the accomplishments of their ancestors, a subtle but powerful message is delivered that greatness lies elsewhere, that excellence does not look like them, and that their contributions began only in recent centuries. But when accurate history is revealed, it becomes clear that people of African descent were not just present in the ancient world. They were leaders who directed the course of empires, builders of massive structures, creators of intricate systems, and guardians of powerful knowledge. The men and women who ruled in regions like Nubia and Kush were not supporting characters in someone else's story. They were the architects of their own future, advancing social structure, city planning, and diplomacy in ways that rivaled and sometimes surpassed their contemporaries. These individuals understood the power of knowledge and passed it on through generations, shaping the very foundation of culture in their region. Their leadership was rooted in strategic thinking, ethical structure, and innovation that was far ahead of its time. And now uncovering those realities breathes life into the understanding that Black excellence has always been part of humanity's shared development. When younger generations are shown these truths, something begins to shift. Confidence grows not from external affirmation, but from internal alignment with a reality that proves they come from a heritage of progress, not deficiency. They begin to see their own reflection in the mirror of history, not distorted, not minimized, but recognized with clarity. That reflection empowers them to imagine more, to question limitations, and to reach beyond the narrative boundaries placed around them. They realize that leadership is not something to be claimed from others, it's something to be reclaimed from within. Empowerment rooted in truth creates a more accurate and holistic view of global history. It pushes back against stereotypes that for generations have framed African civilizations as dependent or disconnected. It dismantles the fiction that innovation skipped over one region in favor of others. With every archaeological find, every restored artifact, and every retranslated inscription, a fuller image of the ancient world comes into focus. In this image, Black pharaohs stand not in the shadows of larger empires, but at the center of human achievement. Their cities, their systems, their values, they were all part of a powerful legacy that shaped the very idea of civilization. This clarity has ripple effects. It influences education, shifting curriculum from narrow to inclusive. It impacts cultural pride, reinforcing a sense of value and worth that is based on truth, not illusion. It changes how nations engage with one another, recognizing shared contributions instead of reinforcing historical separation. Art, in media, in science and government. This deeper understanding of heritage informs the decisions of today's leaders and creatives, who now move forward with the strength of memory restored. To understand that Black rulers once stood at the head of advanced societies is to recognize that erasure was never about absence. It was about control. But time has revealed what was hidden, and today people are reclaiming the right to remember. They are reclaiming the pyramids built by ancestors who understood astronomy and geometry. They are reclaiming trade routes established by those who managed complex economy. They are reclaiming language, art, symbolism, and innovation that was passed down through generations, even when written records refused to name them. The legacy of Black pharaohs is not a fragment, it is a foundation. It belongs not just to the descendants of those rulers, but to all who value truth and knowledge. Reconnecting with this legacy doesn't divide, it unites because it restores balance. It invites everyone to see the broader truth about humanity's shared progress. And for those whose stories were buried, it restores voice, vision, and a path forward built on pride that comes from authenticity, not imitation. This journey of rediscovery is far from over, but with each revelation, the veil lifts further. The people of today, especially those long separated from the roots of their origin, can look back and see a line of strength that stretches far into the past. They no longer have to accept a version of history that ignores their place in. They can walk forward with a deeper sense of purpose, guided not by myths, but by the enduring truth that they come from builders, thinkers, warriors, and leaders. The story was never lost. It was always there, waiting to be restored.